Hey Faith Family, welcome to the Beyond Sunday podcast at Calvary Bible, where we go beyond the Sunday sermon to explore some rabbit holes and to bring some biblical truths to the surface. We hope you enjoyed today's episode.
Calvary Bible Church, welcome back. We got another episode of Beyond Sunday. And if you're watching, you see I do have another bald-headed friend with me this week, but it's not Pastor Randy, it's Chris Hiestand. Chris, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so I just mentioned before we started recording, I don't know when this is going to actually be put out for the church to listen to or watch, but there are a few hints probably for people that they ought to pick up on. Maybe like the clothes we're wearing. So you guys got to figure out, it's a mystery, when are we recording this? I mean, Chris is here.
If it's in 10 years, you're going to be like, what in the world were they wearing?
Oh, yeah, why does that guy have a pineapple shirt on? That's odd.
Like SpongeBob or something.
Yeah. SpongeBob. You a SpongeBob fan?
I do find it funny. So I don't know what that says about my maturity, but I do find it funny.
I've watched some episodes. I think it's a pretty, of like cartoons. Like I'm not a like diehard, but I've seen episodes and laughed and thought it's pretty clever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Clever cartoon.
Not just for kids.
Nope. Most cartoons are not just for kids.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I watched Tom and Jerry on some Saturday mornings, and there's some stuff that like kids right over their head.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Chris, we both have coffee cups in our hand, so it'll be
Cheers.
fitting my joke this morning. Why did the coffee call the cops?
I don't know. Why did the coffee call the cops?
It got mugged.
Oh, wow. That would, I don't know how that would go with my kids. I try with those, but yeah, no luck.
No, they don't think those kind of things are funny?
No.
Okay. That's unfortunate.
It's okay as long as we laugh.
Yeah, we are not trying to make other people laugh. It's funny to us.
It's funny to us.
Yeah.
And I say whether you get a laugh or an eye roll or a groan, you've succeeded no matter what you've done.
Yep. So keep throwing those dad jokes
That's
out there.
right. Don't stop.
All right, good deal. All right, so the one time marker is we are after the Sunday that you were with us preaching. Right. And so I do want to look back to that and then just talk about, your work in Senegal a little bit too. But one of the things that I heard some feedback on, people were encouraged by when you were with us was the phrase, always have your yes on the table. Where did that come from again?
Yeah. So that was not original to me. We took a trip with our 8th graders to Philadelphia. So there was it was called the Philly Project, I believe, that we worked with at that point. And one of their interns was staying there, and he just came and had breakfast with us one morning and shared his story and how he got to be working with that project. And that was one thing that stood out to all of us, like the kids to the adults. He's like, always have your yes on the table. So I think that just kind of stuck. Simply put.
And that was one of the ways that you landed in Senegal. It was, you weren't closing doors, but as opportunities presented themselves, you pushed the door open, and if it kept opening, you just walked through it.
Yeah, pretty much.
And then further down that trail of thought there, we have this, someone said to me, they really appreciated that morning because you redeemed their perspective on missions. And we talked about this at one point, I think a week or two prior. We had a mission Sunday. It was just the week prior to the week you preached for us. But we talked about how I think there's a perspective of missionaries, like they are the Navy SEALs of Christians. Like if you are a all in, on fire, love Jesus no matter what Christian, then like being a missionary is kind of where that ends. And how maybe short-sighted that is, or it sells short the folks who aren't on the mission field. But with that in view, can you kind of just tell a little bit about how your journey debunks that mission or that myth maybe a little bit? Not that you aren't a Navy SEAL type Christian.
Yeah. No, that's a great topic. And there's a lot of things to say about it. But, I think I've read stories of people who have wanted to go in the field. I mean, people of old who've wanted to go, and God closed the door. And so they had to work through the disappointment of not being able to go. And then people who, of course, wanted to go, and they got to go. And so, the other question that sometimes you ask is like, Moses asked, "Why me, Lord? Why are you sending me?"
Right.
And of course, God answered all of his questions and his fears and everything. But one of the questions as we thought about is like, well, why us? Like, why should we go? What qualifies us? And but the opposite question is like, well, why not us? Like, what makes us so special that we would not go somewhere and do that kind of thing? So anyway, really to kind of put it is that the way we look at missions is, you take your relationship with the Lord and what he's called every single Christian to do, and you kind of just transplant that to some other place. You're just in a different location. And I'm not trying to minimize that, because of course there's lots of things. There's language, there's culture, there's all kinds of new things you have to learn. But for any Christian, whether they stay or they go, you're always learning. You're learning how to interact with the people that you work with. You're learning to interact with people in your neighborhood, and you've got to, in a sense, you have to ask God for wisdom in any stage of life that you're in, any place of your life, to how do I reach the people that are around me? So you're learning, about people who are different than you, even in your own neighborhood, even in your own work setting. And even as God brings the nations to us, there's so many opportunities where we need to ask God's wisdom. So I feel like we're all in the same boat. We're just in a different location. That's all it is.
Yeah. So give me off the top of your head, if you can, what's a similarity between your life when you were living in Marietta and your life when you're living in Senegal? What are ways that you were on mission in a very similar way in those two different locations? And then I'll ask you for differences too.
Yeah, I think when we lived in Marietta, I mean, we intentionally wanted to live in Marietta because at that time, the youth center was just right down the street from where we bought a house. And so even thinking about the children or the teens in that setting, it was, even like looking at youth culture. I mean, there's that age difference. And so there's that kind of culture gap. But even, the kids in Marietta at that point, not kind of like the kids that I grew up around or, or like the kids at our church, different. Different values, different lifestyles, different backgrounds in their home life and things like that. So even just trying to learn that culture and how do I reach the kids that are part of this culture, so that, or even neighbors that thought widely differently than us. I mean, I had a neighbor who just really staunch atheist, actually both sides, one house here didn't believe in God, the other side didn't believe in God. And so again, interacting with people who don't think like you do and look at God and look at religion differently. So coming into contact with all kinds of worldviews, again, right where you live, just in small town Marietta.
Right.
And
I'm thinking, your next door neighbors in Senegal probably have, compared to those neighbors in Marietta, maybe they had a similar value to you in Senegal that you didn't share. Like, I'm guessing they're not atheists. Is that fair?
It's very rare to come across an atheist.
Yeah.
Right. And even to talk about religion is something that's normal. It's expected. They would think that you would be strange if you're not talking about your religion.
Okay.
Because it runs through every part of your life.
Yeah.
Your day is ordered by religion. For Muslims especially, like your day is ordered by when's the next prayer time.
Yeah.
And keeping count of your prayers during the day. How many words did I use? And, all of those things.
Yeah. Washing
before meals. And even the meal is part of, there's religious tones in it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I think that's so important for us to hear because, again, to get to bust that myth, you might say, of missionaries are the only ones who are gifted to do it, or the only ones who are called to, be evangelizing or advancing the kingdom. There you are in Senegal, reaching a people who are lost, but you had people in Marietta who were doing needed the same thing. So I'll get to a difference question in a second, but before we get there, What about the mission in Senegal is more difficult than, or no, let me ask you this. Why is it that you felt the need to do missions or ministry in Senegal as opposed to Marietta, where you were? Because they're in both places.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think it came, partially from a conversation that I was having with another brother, and he was just kind of remarking about, let's say the number of churches in Lancaster County,
Mm-hmm.
and, number of healthy churches that are in Lancaster County.
Yep.
And so, and another thing that I was thinking on in the, what was the name of the class? Perspectives. Thank you, man. Need more coffee. Perspectives, and they talk about the great missionary imbalance, and talking about how 90% of missionaries are going to places where there are already churches established. So kind of flooding places that really the gospel has already been sown. And again, there's need to go to those places to equip and encourage and build up and all those things. Yeah. But that the the minority of missionaries are being sent to places that they're either unreached or unengaged, or, peoples like that. And so that struck a nerve with me. Yeah. And thought, okay, so what does it look like to maybe go and do ministry where others have not done ministry before? And so anyway, that began to churn in my system. Yeah. And so that ultimately, as we were looking at where to serve in the world, looking specifically in places where there's a large number of people group that would be considered unreached, I think less than 2% Christian. Yeah. So, right. Yeah.
Cool. You used the phrase, it struck a nerve, right? Which I think even that, like, striking of your nerve is a great example of the Lord just putting that, like, desire on your heart to be going to a place that didn't have it. Because not everyone has that same strike. It doesn't hit them the same way, or they're not called to the same kind of mission, though they would care about it as, a Christ follower, but doesn't strike them the same way that did you, and so you kept walking through that door.
Yeah, but I will tell you something that's encouraging, though, along with that, because again, whether God calls you to stay, or He's going to call you to do one of two things. He's going to call you to stay, or He's going to call you to go somewhere outside of your comfort zone. And in a sense, there's like a localized going, in a sense of we're all called to make disciples and to evangelize and build up the church. So there's that part of it. But going far, or kind of staying, being part of the church that you are, helping to build up and equip, like it says to do in Ephesians 4. So anyway, but one thing I was really encouraged by, especially because, to go over to Senegal, and for any missionary who's going to go somewhere, of course, they need churches behind them. They need, they need that support. So one thing in the support raising process, because actually you talk to any missionary, they don't like doing that. They don't like to say, hey, would you support the work of what's happening over there?
That's got to be so hard.
Right. But one thing that I found that was really encouraging that is people are like, they hear about the need in Senegal and they say, yeah, I want the gospel to go there, so I want to send you. Yeah. So even from, across the ocean, there are people who are like, I care about the gospel going over there. I'm staying here, but I want to see the gospel go forth over there. And I think that's really encouraging.
Yeah. 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 We're all doing our part.
So God strikes a nerve for anybody who gives. Yeah. God strikes a nerve for people to give generously and say, yeah, I want to see the gospel go there. So yeah, it's happening, but in a different, there's a different kind of ministry involved in that.
Yeah, and that's someone with their yes on the table, not with going physically, but sending prayers and financial support and anything they can to keep that mission going. I was just going to say, like, I can't seem to leave Lancaster County. Like, now the Lord hasn't called me other places. He hasn't, like, called me to the mission field, I don't believe. I do pray about that sometimes. Because I want my yes to be on the table, but the opportunity is just, the door doesn't seem to present itself, doesn't show. And so here I am, but I don't want to feel at the same time like I'm stuck either. Like, so that's something I've had to mentally process and work through. Like, am I being disobedient, or am I leaving my yes on the table? But anyway, that's just a little bit about my own thoughts there for me. So differences, right? Similarities are you've got neighbors on both sides, but differences between the, like, now that you are full-time, like people are supporting you in a variety of ways. So you're sent. Mm-hmm. How is that different than where you were when you were in Marietta?
Mm-hmm. Great question. I think, well, in a lot of ways, it's not, I'll talk about some of the similarities, like, because each person that you come across has a different story. They have, even within the Muslim perspective, I mean, there are different branches of Islam, and different people follow different spiritual guides. And so their flavor of Islam is going to be a little bit different. So everybody has a story, and you have to, kind of get at and ask lots of questions, like, how did you arrive to that worldview? How did you arrive to those conclusions? So just like you would maybe talk to your neighbor who is an atheist, you'd say, oh, so how did you arrive to that conclusion?
Yeah.
And, finding out who they are and their background and all those kind of things. So it's like each person is a case by case basis. You can't just say, well, all Muslims believe this, and so therefore I approach every single person the same way. The differences would just, the main difference would be the culture, like what they value, what they feel is real friendship. I mean, so as you look to integrate with people, integrate into the culture, as you look to, what does it mean to be a friend? What does it look to love people? There, you have to kind of get the idea that Paul was getting at, and saying that I become all things to all people, to save as many as possible. And so it's kind of figuring out, what does that actually look like? How much time do you spend with people? And what kind of things are going to, again, strike a nerve with them? Because one person might be thinking, I just don't know what to do with my shame. I feel shame. They look at, their relationship with God, not more from like a legal standpoint of, am I justified, or am I unrighteous? The gravity of sin is not as big there, and they're more works mindset based. And so it's kind of like, as long as I tip the scale the right way,
okay.
Everything will be okay. But the main thing too is so that I don't have shame. I don't have shame before God. I don't have shame before my neighbors, especially. And so honor is a major thing in that culture. So how do you honor people, and how do you talk about honoring God in that culture? So it's it's figuring out what kind of things biblically are they going to be more in tune with than the things that we're normally talking about here.
You
again,
really
not that you change the message.
Right.
The message is the same, but there's things that are just going to strike a chord a little bit more with them than maybe it would for us here.
Oh yeah, I remember going down to Bolivia a couple years ago, and Sarah Longenecker, I was going to teach on a Sunday morning, and she said her counsel or instruction was like, you just don't talk about things that are like, pertinent to, or actually this was instruction to all of us, because we had testimony times too. She said, you don't really need to spend a lot of time talking about like anxiety and depression and things like that, because that's just not part of their world down there. Like in America, it's a very big problem. And it's something that needs to be addressed, and something that you throw the word out there and they're like, oh yeah, I've felt that, I feel that. But in Bolivia, it was not. It wouldn't have struck a chord. They would have, and these are folks in the jungle. So like their lifestyle was radically different than ours, but the message was still the same. But how do we get to the messages is different. Where did I want to go next? So missions. I want to stay around this idea of like the difference between folks who are called to stay and folks who are called to go. So before we started recording, we were talking about the difference between or what constitutes missions work, and what makes it like, where's that threshold where you're like, yeah, no, this is distinctly missions, like I'm being sent like to go and take the gospel and do ministry, versus not missions work. Help us think about that, defining missions.
Well, I think again, I'm not an expert on this, but there's a lot of activities that we Christians do that are good, in the sense of good works, loving our neighbor, and all of those things. But let's say, for instance, we go around and we're helping to build schools, or we're digging wells, we're sending food and all those kind of things. But if the gospel is never shared, or disciples are never being made, people are not being taught, what it means to obey all of Christ's teachings and to follow him. If you just do all these things over here, but we're not doing the evangelism, the disciple making, the building up of churches, the planting of churches, can all these things over here just be called missions? And I would have to say they're good things that we're doing to bless people, but without the gospel, without disciple making and all those things, that is gone. I feel like these things can be tools in a sense to bless people, but alongside of the Great Commission call. So if you just go to Matthew 28 and you look at what did Jesus tell us to do in the Great Commission, if we're doing those things, we can be sure that we're doing missions work. Yeah. We're doing missions work. Some people would go a little bit more strict that and saying, like, missions work, it means that you have to actually go across the culture and do the Great Commission there. I don't know if I would go that far.
Right.
Yeah.
But those are the people that we would define as missionaries.
Right. Yeah. Somebody who has kind of physically left their culture. Yeah.
Because I think to a point, everyone is called to be in that first camp that you mentioned. Like, we're all called to not just do the things that Jesus calls us to do, as far as like loving our neighbor, giving a cup of cold water to the thirsty, caring for the orphan and the widow. Like, Jesus calls us to be good neighbors, but if the gospel, and the gospel, really, he's calling us to make disciples as we're doing those things. And again, it's just that delineation between what we think of as missionaries and what is actual missions work. And so you being a full-time missionary, a supported missionary, correct me if I'm wrong, would be you're going to a place where you need that kind of like financial support. It's there was a sharp kind of shift in your life where you left a particular place and situation to go to a different place and situation to keep doing the same thing, but with a different, just in a different way. Like, you're connected to the seminary and working on like church plant thoughts and ideas, and obviously in Senegal. So, yeah.
And I think that, again, because there are secular institutions that are not Christian that are doing charity work, and so they're blessing people, they're donating and kind of things. So you'd say, okay, well, are they a missions organization? So again, it kind of shows, okay, we've got to have the gospel, we've got to have evangelism, we have to have discipleship, we have to have planting of churches. And again, maybe it's just going back to Acts and saying, okay, so what? Because you won't see the word missionary in the Bible,
right? You
just won't see that.
Yeah.
But you look at, okay, what was happening in the early church? You saw the church growing. You saw the gospel being shared. You saw the church growing. It says, this many believers were added to the church that day. But then you see people specifically commissioned to go into these other regions to, with the intention, the church said, we want to intentionally send people out to go to share the gospel here, and then to see a new church started, believers come in, a new church started, and then to see churches, go from there. Right. So, I guess what makes the difference between somebody who just evangelizes versus somebody who is a missionary, perhaps it could be the intentional going out to see a new church started, new believers come in, not in a sense of planning a church where you have believers already and moving to another location and then trying to bring more people in. But this place, there is no church there. It doesn't exist. And now we're going to evangelize people. And then those people are, at some point as they grow, they're going to self-identify as a local church, and we're going to plant a new church, and I think that's a little bit different than maybe let's going to start another campus or do that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think so. One more question comes to my mind. What would you say to someone who is, just thoughtfully praying about a call to missions, like maybe the chord's been struck, or the thoughts in their mind, and they're trying to decide, and do I pursue this, or how do I pursue this? Or do I stay? Like, how would you counsel someone to kind of walk that path?
Yeah. I think first of all, continue to pray. Just pray, God, bring me to the right people, the right conversations. Lord, if this is something that you want, I want to be ready to say yes to that call, and just guide me through these coming days to show me. And then I think it's great to have conversations with people that you know and trust, mature believers. So it could be, a mentor that you have. I'd certainly include church leadership in that. Like, go to one of your pastors or all of your pastors or elders, or, that kind of thing. Say, here's what I'm praying through. Like, get them involved in that process. That's a good thing. Talk to other missionaries that about their story. How did they feel called? What kind of steps did they take initially? And also, don't be afraid if the process takes time.
Yeah.
That was something that we struggled with, because again, it kind of felt like we were being called to that, say around 2015, and we didn't leave for the field till 2022. And for us at certain times, that made us question, like, are we really supposed to be doing this? Like, why is it taking so long and everything? But looking back now, we can see how the Lord he often takes a lot of prep time with people. I mean, look at what happened with Paul.
Yeah.
Paul, he was on fire after he became converted,
Yeah.
and then he started preaching, and then as soon as his life was in danger, and then he went away for, I think it was like a decade or something before he came back into what he was doing. And so sometimes the Lord kind of puts you right into something, but sometimes the Lord has you wait and is prepping you and having you wait for a period of time to get you ready and get you equipped in some sense. So yeah, I think those are some of the main things.
Yeah, that's good counsel. Pray, seek counsel, keep your church leadership, in the loop so they can walk alongside you, and
talk to other missionaries
right.
and find out their experience.
Yeah.
Take, another thing that really helped us was just taking a trip somewhere.
Yeah.
I think, I want to say it, like, initially, I don't think it really matters much where you could go and be alongside a missionary from, say, your own church. So maybe like a CBC missionary, or there might be another opportunity through some other means where you say, I'm going to go short term somewhere and just kind of see a day, kind of day to day, the life of somebody who's serving in this way.
That's great.
Yeah.
Good deal.
Plug to come to Senegal, maybe.
There you go. Yeah. So here's a little teaser. We are planning a trip to Senegal. When I say planning, I mean, we want to get to Senegal in 2025. So that might be something you ought to consider, joining that team. And Chris and I will start having those conversations, somewhat shortly here. And maybe by the time you listen to this, they will have already begun. Time is a fickle thing. Good deal. All right. Well, thank you for joining me, Chris. Here's another thing I like about Chris.
You like me?
I do. Well, I like this about you. No, I think like I grew up too. I'm thinking about missionaries, and we busted the myth that they're all just like Navy SEAL Christians, like they're the best of the best. Not again. Don't take that the wrong way. So we're all doing missions work, but then I also felt like, man, like I just don't know if I'm like them. Like you're a normal guy. Not that the missionaries it sounds like I'm saying that all missionaries I knew growing up were not normal, but the things that I knew about them did not seem normal to me. And so here's a guy who grew up in Lancaster County, graduated from Donegal, lived in Marietta, has a wife and kids, and that's pretty normal to me. And those kind of things I either didn't pick up on or didn't think about, and that's about as normal as you get. Okay, because Chris is sometimes a little not normal, but anyway, that's I think just an encouragement to all of us that to stay open to what the Lord's doing. And like you said, God might be calling you, He might not be calling you. Some folks try to get on the mission field and they don't land there, and don't be discouraged in that. Like we're all on mission together, and there's different ways to be a part of that too. Some go, some stay and support, and we're all part of it.
Yeah, that's right. We each have our calling, just like in the church. We all have different roles in the church, and we celebrate them and we use them to the best of our abilities with the Holy Spirit's help.
Yeah, good deal. All right, Chris, thanks again. Appreciate it.
Me. Yeah.
All right. If you have any questions for the podcast any week, you can send them into podcast@cbcmj.com, and we'll get after them. Okay. All right. Thanks, and we will see you guys on Sunday.
Thanks again for joining us on today's episode. And remember, our Sunday sermons are meant to lead us to a life of worship beyond Sunday.